Thank you, everybody. So I am really pleased. We're going to adjust the agenda back to the way we originally had it, because we were in triage on time. And I'm very pleased to introduce to you Mr. Bill Hobson from the Downtown Emergency Service Center in Seattle, which is one of the largest nonprofits in the state dealing with these issues. He's going to chat with us, and then Mr. John Scholes, who's with the Downtown Seattle Association. Raise your hand there, John. Is going to follow him. Each of them are going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A with them. Okay. Thanks,
Okay,
Bill.
thank you, Karen, and thanks for having me up here. It's not often I get to visit your community. I've known Tom and Ken for years, it seems like, and I'm familiar with the good work that Compass Health does, and I apologize. I'll say immediately I'm embarrassed, even though I live a short 30 miles away. I don't often get to Everett, and I'm not really familiar with the dynamics, but just what I've heard this morning, it all has a very familiar ring to it. We are dealing with some of the same issues. I also want to say that I'm probably not going to be as upbeat and optimistic as Troy and the fella from the city of Tacoma was, because we have some problems in Seattle and in King County. You probably, in the data that Troy and the city person gave you about homelessness is in the hundreds. Our numbers are in the thousands. Our one-night count, which is required by the federal government in order for a community to be eligible to receive federal homeless dollars, every community has to do that in order to have that eligibility, and it's done on a common night nationally now. In January, selected intentionally in the coldest and most inclement time of the year, when those people sleeping outside are people that truly could not find shelter, transitional housing, or permanent housing. In the last one-night count, we found close to 3,200 people sleeping outside in King County. And within the city limits of Seattle, it was about 2,350 people. This does not count people that are sleeping in the roughly 3,000 shelter beds that our community has and the roughly 5,000 transitional housing apartments. There is an affordable housing crisis in this country, and I know a lot of us tend to invest money in workforce housing when we think about affordable housing, the 60 to 80% of median income housing. In the community that I work in, we don't have a shortage of that kind of stock. Our shortage is in below 30% of median housing. And people that are living on supplemental security income, SSI or SSDI, usually are at 15% of median income, and the availability of that kind of housing is really not very much. Our 10-year plan in the last 9 years has produced over 5,000 units of housing specifically designated for homeless people, and yet we see no appreciable impact on our one-night count numbers during that time. When the 10-year plan was launched, we had about 2,800 homeless people across the county, and our thinking was about 2,000 of those were inside the city limits of housing of Seattle. In the organization I work for, we found in 2013 housing for 458 people, and I'm talking about permanent housing. That same year, our entry programs, our emergency shelter, our crisis outreach teams, our street outreach teams encountered over 1,100 new people we had never seen before. There are many drivers for that. One of the first myths that I want to dispel is Seattle is no more a magnet for homeless people than Chicago, New York, LA, Dallas, Fort Worth, St. Louis, all of whom think their town is a magnet. There's this myth out there that homeless people have this Condé Nast that rates cities according to the luxuriousness of their support service system. Trust me, folks, if you're a person living with schizophrenia, paranoid type, and you're very concerned about the Central Intelligence Agency implanting thoughts in your brain, The last thing that you're going to concern yourself with is trying to scout out the city that has the most luxurious homeless assistance system. It is driven by many things. When I meet with people and I get this magnet theory question thrown at me, I invariably throw a question back. How many of you were born and raised in Seattle? And I might get 20, 25% of the room at most that allow us how. Well, it was a magnet for you guys. It was a magnet for me. I'm a transplanted Texan. Why would we think it shouldn't be a magnet for homeless people? They came to Seattle for exactly the same reasons we all came to Seattle, looking for more opportunities for ourselves, looking for a more commodious city to live in. I don't think that, I really would like to dispel the magnet theory. I don't think that that is really what we're dealing with. What we're principally dealing with is an affordable housing crisis. All of the issues that I've heard you guys talk about in the 1.5 to 2 hours I've been sitting in the room are very familiar because we deal with the same thing in Seattle, and John Scholes from the Downtown Seattle Association will do a very good job of explaining those. We can rearrange services. We can create new service programs. We can probably wrench maybe 5 to 10% greater efficiency out of the service delivery system. And all we're really doing in terms of really addressing this is rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. The answer to this issue is the production or acquisition of affordable housing, and that's a heavy lift. It costs a lot of money. And we have a revenue structure in this state that simply cannot produce an appropriate amount of money in order to take housing, affordable housing acquisition or affordable housing production to the sort of scale that we need to have to get homeless people off the streets. Troy did a really good job in explaining human housing first. I was very proud of him. We opened our first Housing First projects in 1997, 2 of them simultaneously, and it was the first time it had ever been done in Seattle. And I was just beginning to get familiar with, among other things, I'm the administrator of a drug alcohol treatment program. I'm not a clinician. I'm also the administrator of a mental health program. I oversee about 300 beds of emergency shelter and a little over 1,000 units of permanent supportive housing. But as a drug alcohol treatment administrator, I had heard of harm reduction. I'd heard it talked about in the media, and it kind of sort of made sense. But we were partnered with Old AIDS Housing of Washington, now it's called Building Changes, in the development of a project for AIDS-affected people who were either living with a severe and persistent mental illness or a co-occurring substance abuse disorder. And the reality in that project, since it's been opened, over 90% have been coping with all 3 of them. As I began to try to translate what little I was learning about harm reduction into a housing project, it began to dawn on me that what we were being asked to do, if someone were using drugs and alcohol in the privacy of their own apartment, and that's all they were doing, they weren't selling dope on the street in front of the building. They weren't bringing their cronies into their apartment using it as a shooting gallery. They weren't otherwise setting their hair on fire, running through the building, threatening the safety of other residents or staff working in the building. If all they were doing was using in the privacy of their own apartment, this planning group was asking us to treat that as a clinical issue as opposed to a property management criminal justice issue. When that began to sink in on me, I quickly scheduled meetings with Norm Mailing, the King County prosecuting attorney, and Mark Sidron, the Seattle city attorney, both of whom were officed right across the street from this building, and said, this is what they want us to do. What's your reaction? And immediately, both were supportive of it. And it sort of took me aback that the heads of the 2 criminal justice systems would be on board with such a radical notion. And as I got away and had an opportunity to reflect on it, it began to dawn on me, sure, these two guys, more than the average citizen in Tacoma, know that throwing a junkie out on the 3rd Avenue does not one thing to promote public safety. Keeping them stably housed in a housing project in close proximity to treatment alternatives is a much better prospect for public safety. I guess the penultimate discussion of Housing First has centered around the project that we sponsored and really started the conceptual development in 1999, but because of a series of lawsuits to prevent it from coming into existence, it didn't actually open until 2005. It's called the 1811 East Lake Project. It's for late-stage chronic alcoholics. Excuse me. You may want to jump in here, Ken, but somebody produced an NIAAA study that had an operational definition of late-stage chronic alcoholic. It was a man or woman over 50 years of age with a minimum of 15 years of street alcohol addiction history under their belt and 8 or more failed attempts at conventional treatment. If you met that demographic, according to this study, you had less than a 6% chance of recovering for the remainder of your life. In the meantime, they're here. What are we going to do about it? The inspiration for 1811 was actually consequent to a press conference that Norm Rice, then the mayor of Seattle, and Ron Sims, then the King County executive, were very troubled about this population, called a press conference, and they shared a bunch of data with the community that our policy toward this population, since public intoxication was decriminalized in Washington state through a series of court cases back in the early 1970s, our policy toward the population had essentially been one of official benign neglect. We just sort of ignored that they were there and occasionally busted them. And what the two executives shared a lot of information about this population, that this benign neglect policy is reaping two principal outcomes. The first one is the population is dying on the streets at incident rates much greater than any other subset of homeless people. And the second one was, before they die, they consume extraordinary amounts of taxpayer-funded crisis institutional care. Frequent flyers in the King County Jail, frequent utilizers of Harborview Emergency Room Department. So I proposed to my board that we be the agency to try to develop this project. Ultimately, we got it all funded. Ultimately, I have to give kudos to DSA, the Downtown Seattle Association. They were one of the first early supporters when it was simply a concept. I had a meeting with Blake Nordstrom, who was the chair of DSA that particular year, and it took me 45 minutes of description of what we wanted to do and why we wanted to do it, and he became an ardent ally, testified before city council, talked to the county executive. He really made his support for the project very public, as did the chief of police. At the time was Norm Stamper. You have a lot of political cover when you go to elected officials, when you have the business community and the law enforcement community supporting kind of a radical notion of taking these folks, and basically they're guys, less than 10% of the late-stage chronic alcoholic are women, and taking these guys, putting them into a brand new facility that actually is quite nice, surrounding them with a lot of supportive assistance and not requiring that they stop drinking as a precondition for entry. Everybody, you remember Ken Sram? Ken Sram gave us a SRAMI, for the dumbest idea for that year was what SRAMIs were for. I'll follow up on that. We went to King County when the building was ready to open and asked them to produce a rank-ordered list by cost of crisis utilization. They gave us a 200-person list. We started with number 1, the most expensive consumer of emergency department resources and jail resources, and proceeded down it until we had 75 residents. And I want to support a point that Troy and the folks from Tacoma made. We only had to offer this to 77 people in order to get 75 folks willing to move in. And the 2 people that refused subsequently moved in. Their refusal was predicated on the notion that, nah, you guys are spinning tails. I'll get in there, you'll tell me I have to stop drinking, and I'm not gonna do that, you'll throw me out. Well, these 2 guys, after several of their buddies moved in and said, no, man, this is really on the up and up, as vacancies occurred, they ultimately moved in. I mentioned that we were sued 28 months. It went all the way from an administrative law judge level to the state Supreme Court. And if you know anything about judicial process, that's actually moving at the speed of light. And finally, we were green-lighted to begin construction. During that hiatus, we partnered with a group of research scientists at the University of Washington, applied for and received a $500,000 Robert Wood Johnson evaluation grant, had a research design work through the use IRB and a data collection team assembled when we moved the first people into the project. You can read the outcome data of that study in the April 2009 edition of the Journal of the American Medical Association. The 2 principal takeaways are there was a $4 million reduction in cost of utilization, which I really wasn't worried about reducing cost. I was somewhat surprised by the magnitude, and let me embellish that a little bit, but what I mean. If you tallied up the cost of utilization that these folks racked up in the 12 months prior to move in to 1811 and compared that to the same data 12 months after moving into 1811, the latter number was $4 million lower than the former number. What really took me aback was there was a concomitant 30% reduction in alcohol consumption. And we measured alcohol consumption in 2 ways, based on client report and based on staff observation. And there was an interesting, very strong correlation between what residents were telling us about their consumption patterns and what our staff were actually observing, which says another thing about late-stage chronic alcoholics. These guys are pretty unvarnished. They will tell you the truth, you know. They don't have anything else to lose. They've lost it all already. I think that housing first does scare neighborhoods. Since 1811 Eastlake opened, we made a deliberate decision not to develop these types of housing projects in downtown Seattle. First of all, it's not fair to downtown Seattle. There's an overconcentration of homeless housing and human service agencies working with homeless people in downtown. And secondly, it's not conducive to the clinical and social stabilization of the very people we're trying to help. If you keep them in a drug-involved, chaotic milieu, your efforts to help them stabilize clinically are hampered and frequently thwarted. So what we do is go out into neighborhoods where other people in the city want to live. We have a project as far north as the Northgate area of Seattle. We have a project down in Rainier Valley in Columbia City. We have a project in West Seattle in the Delridge neighborhood. And we're just beginning to break ground on a project in the Inner Bay neighborhood right across the street from Whole Foods. And our idea is that, Troy kind of intimated about it, but I really want to clarify it a bit. Housing first is predicated on a notion that if you eliminate the chaos of homelessness from a person's life, clinical social stabilization and social stabilization will occur faster and they'll be far more enduring. When you're living on the street and preoccupied with surviving, you tend to adopt behaviors that have a lot of utility for street survival, but are actually dysfunctional if you're trying to reintegrate into the community. And what we've observed over the years, that when you put people in housing, those behaviors that they adopted to survive on the street begin to extinguish. Within a month, 2 months, you begin to see a gradual decline in antisocial behavior. There's a lot more I could tell you about our projects. We basically require, my time's up. We basically require that, unlike Tacoma, that there are two requirements for people that move into our projects. Pay your rent and be nice. It basically is what any market rate landlord would expect. Market rate landlords, if any of you are renting apartments, they're not checking on your room to see if you're smoking weed or drinking. They're concerned, are you kind, polite, or at least not abusive to your neighbors in the apartment building? Are you paying your rent? Are you behaving in a responsible way? I don't know why we insist on putting these other kind of restrictions on homeless people when we don't apply them to ourselves. One final thing, very quickly, that you might want to ask about. Our MIDD, Mental Illness Drug Dependency Action Plan, that's the 0.1% sales tax ad, was able to fund a crisis diversion project and award it to our agency. It's been operational now for 2 years. It's a county-wide service. It serves all the jurisdictions in King County. And it is intended, there are only 4 groups of people eligible to refer to that: law enforcement jurisdictions, fire departments, county designated mental health professionals, and emergency department social workers. Those are the only 4. I couldn't get my mental health consumers into that project because I'm not one of those referring entities. And the whole idea is to provide crisis first responders with a therapeutic alternative to jails and hospitals, to swim upstream. Let me leave you with this thought. One, it shouldn't come as a surprise. I don't know how it is here in the Snohomish County Jail, but jails in this nation, certainly in King County, have become default psychiatric institutions. That's wrong. The average inmate in the King County Jail living with a major psychiatric illness spends, on average, 140 days more in incarceration than a general population inmate does, and almost invariably for lesser offenses. And it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot more money to keep a person in jail than it does in affordable housing projects. If you want to talk more about that, I would be delighted, but I don't want to encroach on John's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And again, I appreciate the time as well. Have a few minutes on your agenda and share our experience. John Scholes with the Downtown Seattle Association. I'm a vice president there. We're a membership-based organization, been around since the 1950s, and we also run the Business Improvement District downtown. I've been doing that since 1999. That funds about 70 plus cleaning ambassadors and safety ambassadors that are out on the streets. So we hear about these issues and concerns about folks in need, illegal activity, criminal behavior from our members, property owners, et cetera, but we also see it firsthand through the work of the 75 or so ambassadors that we employ that are out either cleaning the streets or engaging with folks, waking folks up in the morning in doorways, connecting them to service, connecting to 911 when they see illegal activity. And I want to acknowledge a couple other things. One, I have an immense amount of respect for the work that Bill Hobson's done over many decades in downtown to help, very difficult work to help people in need. Two, and Bill alluded to this, we have some major issues, as you all are aware, at the state and federal level upstream that make all of this work incredibly difficult. And I think there's some amount of a reality check that we consistently do of sort of how much can we get done at the local level, even with a ton of goodwill and coming together and bringing a lot of alignment between the business community and others and public safety and human services. But there's a reality of the needs upstream that aren't being met, whether it's mental health treatment or beds or housing, and those are big issues there. It hasn't stopped us from coming together, and I'm glad it hasn't stopped you either. And I think there's actually benefit from coming together in these forums in other cities and urban places that are dealing with these similar issues, coming together around the state to deliver a message to the legislature around these issues. And one other thought before I share a few thoughts about sort of our experience with our Center City initiative is The partnerships between the business community and our organization and the human service and nonprofit community aren't new and weren't birthed through the CCI process. Bill alluded to his conversation with Blake Nordstrom around 1811. So we've had a number of relationships over many years with nonprofit housing providers, with service providers in our neighborhood. We haven't always agreed on everything, and whether it's with homeless advocates, the public defender community, folks like Bill and other providers downtown, but there has been relationships and connections between our leadership and members and folks in those communities. So I think the CCI process that was started under our former mayor, Mayor McGinn, in around 2011, brought us together in maybe a more deliberate and intentional conversation about these issues, but those relationships have existed for some time. And I think one area where they broke down was, and that was a precursor to the Center City initiative, was around a fight over a new panhandling legislation that the city council was moving forward. And we didn't agree on that, and we had some disagreement between the homeless community and the business community around a piece of legislation that was ultimately vetoed by the mayor and sort of made the issue of public safety downtown toxic for a little while. And everyone sort of felt burnt out. The politicians felt burnt out. They didn't want to take it on. The business community was burnt out, and not much happened and not much dialogue occurred. The Center City initiative came out as sort of the ashes of that disagreement. Significant concern among our members of folks in need downtown of illegal activity, frustration, I think, in the human service and housing community about similar issues. The former mayor, to his credit, saw an opportunity to bring people together. And for us, that was significant to get everybody around the table and, one, agree that we have a problem. And we debated, I think, among not everybody, but some folks, whether we had an issue downtown, whether there was too much illegal activity or too many folks in need. So we came around the table similar to this with similar constituencies and folks and agreed we had a problem. We agreed on a vision to define what would success look like. We agreed on a number of indicators that would tell us that we're making progress towards success. I think some of the things that we have yet to accomplish, and I'll stand up here and tell you we still have lots of problems in downtown Seattle, and they actually may be worse than when we started this. I don't want that to discourage you, but we probably have more people in need out on the streets downtown, and we certainly have plenty of illegal activity. But we've bought into this process because we don't see another path forward. We believe we need to achieve alignment between both the public sector and the various different agencies, from the city attorney's office to the police department to human services, but also in the private sector and the nonprofit community. And that alignment is the only way we're going to get this done. And we've had plenty of misalignment between our city attorney and the law enforcement and the mayor's office and the council and others, which has just created lots of dysfunction, and we all end up spinning our wheels on this issue and not achieving much. So we came together around a vision and around some indicators, and agreed on a couple of high-level strategies and sort of new investments. The expansion of a drug diversion program that was operating in Belltown and was expanded to downtown. It's still being tried out. We don't know if that's working or not. We'll have an evaluation later this year that'll give us some sense of whether a pre-arrest diversion program is making a difference in Seattle. We agreed on additional outreach in downtown and coordinating that outreach with law enforcement, with the security in the parks, with the human service department, with our Metropolitan Improvement District ambassadors, and getting everybody around the same table to try to really develop individual strategies for the folks in need or creating problems, or both, in downtown. There's a lot of work to do with that effort, and we've had some disagreement with our partners in the human service and nonprofit community of whether more outreach is needed in downtown and whether we should be putting resources to that. And I think it's fair to say that maybe there's a little bit of disagreement there. We think there's a lot of value in a more coordinated approach to the outreach that occurs downtown, so that we're providing the right human services strategies when those are called for, but also the right law enforcement strategies when those are called for. And we found that we could get agreement with the folks in the public defender community and in the city attorney's office that if we're providing a detailed human service and a robust human service and outreach approach and offering services and engaging folks, and we're still finding folks are engaged in illegal behavior, that there's an appropriate law enforcement response. And if we do that on an individual level, which is very laborious and it takes a ton of work, and sometimes it's an hour-long conversation among a group of folks about what to do around one person, and we'd like to get some better protocols in place to speed up some of this. But we believe that ultimately is a necessary approach. And yes, it will be more successful with more housing, more treatment beds, and that's absolutely critical. But that approach is important too, to ensure that we're engaging those folks and connecting them to those services, and also providing some amount of accountability for the illegal activity that takes place in our public spaces in downtown. One of the areas where we haven't quite come together on, and I encourage you as you go forward to take this on early in your discussions, is agreeing to a set of metrics that will tell you whether or not you're making progress in achieving success or whether things are getting worse. And I think these issues around public safety and individuals in need and homelessness are often defined by anecdotes and what I saw yesterday and what somebody called in or emailed the mayor's office. And we see this regularly, and there'll be spikes in activity of emails and frustration. And so agreeing on a set of metrics, which is beyond crime data, and we're fortunate to have our ambassadors out on the street that track a ton of data from folks in need and needles they find in human waste and other issues. But to assemble some agreed upon metrics that you can track over time, that you can get reliable data on a regular basis to see if you're making a difference. And maybe you bring in some perception surveys into that as well. We haven't quite got there yet. I think we're close to sort of agreeing on how we define and measure the problem, but I think that it's important to establish that early on. And the second lesson is commit to sort of a regular set of meetings. We would meet, once every 3 months and sort of form subcommittees that would sort of meander along. And this effort needs to be appropriately staffed. You need to meet regularly. And I think you also need to create an operational work group at an operational level, and also have a group at a higher level that's looking at the policy and resource needs to make this effort successful. The CCI effort to date has really operated at that higher level of what are the resources and sort of new strategies we can collectively agree on around a political table to throw at these problems. And it's been going down to Olympia together, starting a drug diversion program, starting this coordinated outreach program, and there's a bunch of other stuff that we need to do. But that all needs to be backed up with an operational group that is really doing the work, tracking the work, and tracking the metrics. So I think we've had some success. The challenges are still there. We're fully bought into this model. We don't see a better path forward. We're all in this neighborhood. As Bill mentioned, we have a significant amount of low-income housing, of subsidized housing, of services. That's not going anywhere. So we're all here stuck with one another, and we've got to figure this out. So we're still at the table. Our new mayor is yet to sort of fully embrace this effort and shape it, but the private sector folks and the nonprofit folks, we're convening ourselves outside of City Hall to sort of restart this effort as our administrations have transitioned. So I'll stop there and leave some time for questions.
So if we can get our speakers back up here, I'll start asking folks for questions. I see Ken is going to jump right out there. Go for it.
Well, I was going to ask, your ambassadors, are your ambassadors paid or volunteers? And if they are paid, who pays them?
They're paid. They're supported by a voluntary tax assessment on downtown property owners. So property owners agree, and the city adopts an ordinance. Many of them are coming out of drug and alcohol addiction, so it acts as a second chance job program in many respects.
Thank you.
Other questions? I'm going to go with David.
You mentioned metrics. What kind of metrics do you think you're headed towards?
We'll look at major crimes, major reported crimes. We're looking at a number of data points that our ambassadors collect, so human waste, needles. We're looking at the calls to the fire department and EMS for responses to folks in need downtown. And we're going to incorporate some amount of perception surveys, whether it's with residents or with sort of property managers, security individuals that are working in private buildings. So that's sort of where we're at right now.
I might also throw in, this may be an area that John and I are not in perfect accord, but I think we're along similar tracks. One of the objectives that the CCI process identified early on is create a safe, livable, vibrant downtown that was welcoming to all people, housed or not, with the expectation that we do want to hold people accountable for their behaviors. Major psychiatric illnesses or addictions disorders are not appropriate defenses for illegality. And from my perspective, nor are they appropriate defenses for incivility, antisocial behavior. We have a standard lease that is very much like anyone would sign if they rented a market rate apartment, but I don't think most of you in the room would want to sign our particular addendums to that lease. The first of which is a good neighbor commitment that we oblige all of our residents to sign. And the fundamental elements, I could go through all of them, but I think most germane for your purpose, is we proscribe illegal and antisocial behavior of our residents in the immediate neighborhood, and we allow the neighborhood. Seattle is really highly focused on organized neighborhoods. They must always have community councils. We let the neighborhood define those boundaries for us. And then we have very strict visitation policies. I think most operators of permanent affordable housing projects for homeless people will tell you that the most unfortunate incidences that occur in their housing projects are not committed by the residents themselves, but their visitors. So we have tight restrictions on who can come into the building under what conditions. So.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from what you've heard today? Yeah, Ed, thank you.
I appreciated your comment about the 77 individuals who were housed in your Housing First program and their selection of that, and the resulting decrease in alcohol issues. I've run a nonprofit housing program for the last 25 years, primarily for families, and I've seen that powerful impact of a structured environment on helping people escape the detrimental, negative environments that they've been trapped in. And behaviors do change. So I just want to reinforce the comment you made about structure and healthy environments creating effective change by themselves without all of the other interventions. Of course, the other interventions are needed for them to elevate themselves to achieve their potential in many cases. But I just wanted to reinforce that comment.
If I could interject a political message here, I think one of the best outcomes of the City Center Initiative is the business community, the human service community, and public officials joining together to create a legislative agenda to appeal for more mental health funding, for greater investments in the State Housing Trust Fund. My agency is celebrating its 35th anniversary on October the 2nd, and the theme is Imagine Seattle Without Homeless People. Well, I'm 74 years old, and I don't have to imagine it, I remember it. And one of the things that is most concerning to me is we have generations of people, many of you in this room, that have never not known a significant homeless problem, and it didn't used to be this way, and it doesn't have to continue. But we cannot get back to that halcyon era of the 60s and early 70s without major public investment in the production of affordable housing. And in the 70s, the federal government basically disinvested in the production of affordable housing. Many states were financially strapped, and they did likewise. And until we do that, like I say, folks, we can spin up all sorts of service interventions to this issue, but that's not the final solution. The solution to homelessness is a no-brainer. It's a home. And if we're not providing that, then all we're doing is providing job security for social workers.
Ashley, you have a comment.
A question for Bill. The 1,000 units of housing that you have, what percentage of those serve at or below 30%? And then how are those units, how can you afford to serve those people at Townsville?
Okay, that's a great question. I should have actually given you an overview of DESC, but on any given day, we're serving about 2,200 separate people somewhere in our agency. 300 units of housing. We have 2 fairly large clinical programs, a mental health and a chemical dependency program, and then we have 1,000 units, I think 1,050 actually units of housing. The majority of that is located in 10 buildings, but about 200 of those units we have secured rent subsidies, usually from the federal government, and we assist people renting market rate apartments if we can find them at rent structures appropriate to a Section 8 voucher. I don't know what the rental market is like here. A typical 75 to 80 unit housing project cost us about $16 million to develop, and it costs approximately $1 million a year to operate. The overwhelming, well, all of that money comes from government of one form or another. We do a bit of private fundraising. Budget of my organization is about $35 million for 2014. 97% of that comes via government contracts, all levels, city, county, state, federal government, and we do a smattering of private fundraising. Basically, our operational stuff is very similar to what Troy put on the board. We use document recording fees. The largest single source of operational support, or the largest 3/4 of that $1 million annual operational expense, comes from some type of federal program through the Stuart B. McKinney Act. And then tenant rents, we require tenants to abide by the standard Section 8 formula of paying 30% of income. And the population that we serve, the way we select people, you heard how we select 1811. It's based on high utilization and expensive utilization. But in our other housing projects, we developed this tool that Troy alluded to called the Vulnerability Assessment Tool. It effectively is a measure of vulnerability. We made a decision a long time ago that we wanted to prioritize our resources for the sickest and most vulnerable people, the people that would be at greatest risk if they had to sleep on the street. So we developed this tool to measure it, and we populate the other 9 buildings that we have on the basis of scores on that assessment tool. We have a cadre of staff that are trained in doing the assessments. That's basically all they do. And so that's how we populate, and that's an overview of the operational support.
Ken, comment or question?
This is a comment with question for both. Given the fact that creating affordable housing, the way we've been doing it in this country, not just Washington State, in trying to create traditional apartments that anybody else would go rent and make that affordable housing, which really needs to be subsidized because most of the people, especially if we're serving people under 30% or even down to 15, can't really pay much anyway. And so then there's not enough money to really sustain the building over time without constant, pretty large subsidies. And just building those buildings costs a ton. In Snohomish County, when we talk about buying a chunk of land and building a building for affordable housing, many cases we're not like Seattle or King County. These aren't 300-400 units. They're usually smaller, so the costs are running $250,000, $350,000 per unit, and then you have to subsidize them after they're built. Acquisition is a little cheaper, but not cheap enough to really make it sustainable. So what I see happening around the world, less so in this country, but beginning in this country, including some in Seattle and Thurston County and San Antonio, Texas, and California, are moving to some lower cost models of housing, which may require some mindset changes by a lot of folks, including zoning changes by cities and counties, of park model homes, mini cabins, and some people like me who like the converted shipping containers because converted shipping containers, unlike the park model stick-built homes, In this environment that's so wet, the park model stick homes will be nice for about 10 years and then begin to rot, where the shipping containers will hold up for a lifetime. And they can be very nice. And in fact, in some places, they stack them and turn them into, apartment buildings. Washington, D.C. is just approved one. What are your thoughts, the two of you? And of course, in Seattle, you've got the apartment kind of approach that wasn't geared toward homeless or poor folks. It was geared toward people with money.
There's a real debate here, and I think the first thing that we would have to overcome is land use code.
Yep.
And the fire life safety standards that are built into our building codes. Diane Sigamora is a good friend, and she's head of our Department of Planning and Development. They're the ones that issue building permits and enforce land use and building codes. And she most eloquently frames this issue that, quite frankly, remains a dilemma in my mind. We effectively are downsizing fire life safety standards for poor people. Is that really where we want to go? And I'm trying to say that as forcefully as Diane would say it if she were here doing it. I also resonate with what you're talking about, Ken. There's, 2,300 people sleeping outside in Seattle tonight because all the shelters are full, and the shelters are full because there's not enough permanent housing to move people in, and there's got to be some sort of solution. I would hate to think that a homeless family was living in a situation that didn't enjoy the same fire life safety standards that my family enjoys, and presumably yours does as well. We have a big debate over legitimizing encampments. And I'm not talking about the kinds of encampments that the good people from Tacoma was talking about, where they were counting one tent as an encampment. I'm talking about an encampment for us is 6 or more or 5 or more tents. We broke up 361 of those in the first 6 months of this year. Breaking up encampments, in my opinion, really forces homeless people to seek out less safe places. I don't know if any of you read The Stranger. If you don't, you should. Dominic Holden took a picture of a 5-tent encampment in the I-5 corridor that is on this concrete swale that separates I-5 from, I can't remember what arterial going into the city, and it's just a sheer drop-off. And in the last 3 months or so, we've had 3 deaths caused by people falling off of I-5 overpasses where they were trying to sleep. So breaking up encampments doesn't alleviate the problem that homeless people are trying to find a safe place to sleep. It just forces them to go into some other neighborhood or find a less safe alternative. So I have to say that apartments, the whole idea, thinking outside the box like the container, I actually was in that project in DC. It's quite nice, and it's not at all what I thought it was going to be. I think of it containers when I'm going by the port of Tacoma and seeing those.
Well, that's what they are, but they're fixed up nice.
No,
and they meet all fire and safety codes. It's not a compromise of fire and safety. It's just a lower cost alternative.
According to what I was told by the sponsor, is they do all sorts of housing. Most of their housing stock is like ours. It costs just as much for them to do those containers to those standards that you're talking about as it costs them to build a 75, 80 unit housing project that have units in it anywhere from 250 square feet to 350 square feet, but fully equipped with a full bathroom and a full kitchen. I don't know. I mean, I have a skewed vision on this because all of the consumers in our organization have been deliberately sought out because they're living with severe and persistent mental disorders or addictions disorders. So I don't see the broad range of the homeless population. I see a very narrow subset that may be 20, 25% of all homeless people. I could conceive a set of circumstances where that sort of thing, if we can get the cost down. When you talk about costing $250,000 to $300,000 a unit, your problem there is the scale that you're developing to. the more units you put into a project, the lower that per unit cost comes down. And right now, we're running about 185 to 190,000 a unit because we're building never any smaller than 75 units. The one we're breaking ground on next Monday is a 97 unit, so the one by Whole Foods. So, and I understand the politics, getting a neighborhood to digest having. In order to apply for city housing levy dollars, to be eligible to make the application, you have to conform to the city's community notification process. And that means leafleting a broad area around your property that you intend, that you acquired a contract on the property and you intend to develop a housing project. And we try not to sugarcoat it. We don't want to rub the neighbor's nose in who we serve, but we try to be pretty transparent about who's going to be there. And we always, in those notices, invite residents to a community meeting that we host somewhere in their neighborhood, usually in a church or some other community gathering hall. Let me tell you, go to one of those neighborhoods and tell 150 people that you are planning to bring 85 or 90 people living with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major clinical depression, some percentage of which also has an addiction disorder. They are freaked from almost the very beginning. And I could go on, we have developed a whole community relations plan. We're happy to share that with any housing operator. That our NIMBY battles now, we're batting about 50-50. We go into one neighborhood and girding our loins, hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst, and there's no hue and cry. And then the next project and the next neighborhood, it's a fight from day one to the minute you open the project, so.
Okay, so last question here from Craig.
For the Downtown Seattle Association, what are the most effective ways that law enforcement can help with street-level nuisance and challenges, in your opinion?
I think to start with, you need quite a bit of them, and you need to be present. And we don't have an urban policing strategy in Seattle, and we're asking our officers through drug diversion programs and sort of new outreach models to do more. And they're not out on the street, and the model in Seattle is still mostly car-based and responding to 911 calls. So in an urban neighborhood like downtown or Capitol Hill, we're having a big challenge with just the number of resources and how you engage officers in sort of a new model of urban policing. And thankfully, we've got a new chief, and we hope to finally get there, but presence.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very, very much. So now you're all wondering, what am I going to do with the last 20 minutes when we have an hour to sort that stuff? I'm wondering that too. I'd like to just mention a couple things about information in the packet, and then I'll tell you what I think we need to do. In your packet, there's a short, I think it's, there's a short description of the Downtown Service Association and the programs that the DESC does. There's a newspaper article that summarizes the City Center initiative that they were speaking to, the collaborative effort that was happening in Seattle to talk about the issues that we're talking about here today. Behind that is the mystery matrix I was looking for earlier from the Everett Gospel Mission that shows the percentage of their population in their housing units by age cohort. And behind that is material from the speakers we are not going to get to today. And so my apologies to Bruce and Robin. I'm going to try to see if we can, if you are available, if we can bring you back next time, because I believe that some of the programs that you guys are going to be speaking to are actually going to be part of the subcommittee recommendations that folks are going to be hearing about next time. So we'll try to expand on some of that. But there is material in your packets that speaks to a Santa Monica policing program, which does a lot of outreach, engaging the police and social workers to connect directly with folks on the street. Robin Fenn was going to speak, and hopefully she'll be able to come back next week, with my apologies, about a really interesting program out of Ohio. We did also look into the Columbus, Ohio Rebuilding Lives project. There's material on all of this in your packets. And I think David is going to speak next time to some of the community courts issues. There's an article about those as well in the material. So there's more reading than you ever need in your packet. But it does cover the stuff, and we'll try to get back to it with my apologies to folks. I need to make sure you know what our map is going ahead, because there's homework. It's actually optional, but I think you really want to know about it if there's some issues that you want to make sure get on the table. So if I could just get that, if people could turn, where the heck is this? It's a few pages before the lavender pages start, maybe 10 pages. It's a document that says proposed roadmap for meetings 5 through 9. Can folks try to find that? Bruce and Robin, I owe you a latte or a drink, whichever you prefer. And if folks found this material, and we need to put that, there's some piece of that we can put up on the screen as well. So our challenge is to get from, in the next 4 meetings, to find recommendations from this group to send back to the larger community. We want to make sure we get all of your ideas on the table and that you have a chance to talk about those ideas and process them in a way that you can come up with those recommendations. And so that means the way that I am recommending that we get through this is to have another homework between now and next meeting, where you have an opportunity to not only review the 47 ideas that are already on the table from discussions in the last 4 meetings, and those are presented in the homework, but to add to those. And then at the next meeting, meeting 6, we will also hear from our 3 subcommittees, and we will have all of their ideas as well. So we'll have what we talked about already, whatever you want to add from the homework, and whatever we hear next time from the 3 subcommittees. And then what we're going to do is combine those in a ballot with some very preliminary information assessment from the city staff. How expensive would this be? Rough swag. How long would it take to do this? Who would have to be involved for this to actually happen? And after meeting 7, we will send that ballot of all those ideas out to you and ask you guys, just the task force members, to fill in a 1 through 5 rating on each of those ideas. 5 meaning you like it a lot, 1 meaning you don't like it at all. So we'll talk more about that, but if you could go to the next, well, actually stay there. So the idea is that the voting on that ballot happens between meetings 6 and 7 on your own. We collate the results, we talk about them at meeting 7. And if you guys, if anyone wants to say, I think the results on this item are skewed, I don't really like this outcome, I'd like to propose that we change how we voted on this item, and here's why. We can have those discussions around any of the items that folks want to try to bring up. And then we'll start to get a sense of where the consensus of the group is, so that I will have a shot at actually drafting an outline of a report for you that you can look at meeting 8, and then a final report that in meeting 9 that we can hopefully sign off on. So that's sort of the game plan from here. So if you go to the next page, the ballot again, the staff, the idea here is that, and this is again, once we voted, we're going to look at the results, and people can challenge the results and say, I'd like us to revote on this item, and here's why. But the idea is that the staff are going to take a quick look again at, is this a short-term or a long-term idea? How expensive is it? And who are the likely key partners we're going to need, a likely lead agency if we can figure that out? The answers may be question marks, but we think this might help to put some of the ideas in perspective. Also, at the next meeting, where we're going to present the results of the homework and look at this ballot that they're going to try to fill out for us just to get this data on the wall before you vote, we'll try to make sure that everybody's clear what the items are that we're asking you to vote on. I don't understand what this is that you're asking me to vote on. We'll talk about it so people know what they're looking at. Okay, if you could go to the net, well, right here, right there. That's the ballot directions for you guys will be simple. Just rate each item, assign it to, I agree strongly that we should pursue this as a community, down to 1, I disagree strongly. So in the next page, what you're going to see in the homework is that I took all the ideas that we've heard at the table, either from the presenters, although not obviously today, since I had to do this before we met, and I tried to sort them into these 6 categories, and these 6 categories are based on the themes from the very first homework that you did. Themes around what you guys thought were the biggest issues and concerns and underlying causes. So one is around improving public safety and reducing crime. That's a major area of concern for the group. Second, the need for more services. Third, the need for more housing and shelter. Fourth, improving public understanding. Fifth, improving interagency coordination, communication. Sixth, things that don't fall into that are advocacy items. And I found that it was pretty easy to take the stuff that we've talked about and put it into one of those 6 categories. So again, the staff are going to be, between now and next meeting, they're going to be doing what we call a swag on everything, all of these columns. And we're going to fill in, you're going to see all the ideas that we've heard from to date filled in over here. You're going to see 47 ideas on the homework that's in your packet, and I'm going to send you that homework after today electronically. And you're going to have a chance to add ideas to that list of 47. And when we get together at the next meeting, we'll have all this stuff filled out on all the ideas. So I'll stop there because I see a question. Ed.
Is there a clearly articulated problem statement that we're responding to? Because the issue exists at so many levels, and
Yes.
the answers to the questions, in my mind, need to relate specifically to what is it we're trying to fix.
That's a really good question. One of the things that I'm going to try to be bringing forward to you, I think at the highest level, the problem statement is the mission, and how do we respond to the issues. This is not a short statement, obviously. All the issues and concerns that you guys put on the table in your homework, issues about the behaviors that you're seeing on the street, issues about homelessness, issues about crime, all those things are, what are the recommendations you want to bring back to the community that you think would be strategies the community should pursue to try to address these issues. So I'm going to be putting together like a 2-page problem statement that tries to capture what we've been hearing, identify some of the major facts that we've heard, and identify some of the places where we don't have data. And I'm going to be working with the co-chairs to pre-review that, and I'll bring that forward for you guys. So we'll try to have that for you before the voting, at least a draft of that. But the problem statement really is around what recommendation, we have all these, the situation with the homelessness and the behaviors on the street that you guys have been talking about for the last 4 meetings. What are the recommendations that you have to try to address those? So they're broad, right? It's all of those categories. It's the criminal stuff, it's the mental health stuff, everything. I'm not sure I'm responding to your question though, Ed.
Yeah, you did, except that I think geographic parameters are part of my question.
Yes, they are.
These are countywide issues, they're citywide issues, they're downtown issues. Do we have some geographic parameters or not?
We do, and you'll recall it's actually in our charter. It speaks to, we're focused on A, the multiple city commercial core areas of Everett, with B, reference, and this was a recommendation from Megan, we need to be mindful of not just shifting, that our solutions not just shift the problem from one part of the city to another. So that nature of the problem statement we did walk through when we talked at the very first meeting about the mission statement and the charter. And so you might want to review both of those documents. They're short, they're in your first part of your binders, but that has it a little bit. Is that helpful? Mark, you have a question? And may I say, I'm just impressed you're awake.
The way my brain works is that you can talk about strategy and you can talk about tactics, okay? And 47 sounds like a huge number to me.
Tactics, yep.
Yeah, and quite a few of them are tactics. Just a thought, would we be more productive if we concentrated on strategies, narrowed the number, and then go from there and develop the tactics later?
That's possible, but I think what we can also do is if we, I think part of my goal is to respect all the ideas that folks have and give those a chance to be reviewed and looked at. And then I think it is very important, once we see how people feel about these various things, to recognize that some are strategies, some are tactics, and try to do some grouping and sorting and decide how we want to present these. You're right, you don't want to just give an unadulterated list of 47 things back to City Council. Their heads would, maybe spin around. That's not productive. We really need to prioritize, make it easy for folks to identify the key strategies that we think are important. So, I hear what you're saying. And that's part of the reason I'm taking it.
Yeah.
There can be a disagreement around what's a strategy and a tactic, and I think we can usually get our head around that. But I would like to have a chance for everybody's ideas to get out there, and then try to do the sorting as we move forward, if that can be workable. But your point is very well taken. So this getting filled out soon at a meeting near you, like the next time you come here. And then I think behind that document, there should actually be the homework. When we bring the ballot, once you guys have cast all your votes, we'll bring it back to you and we will resort it from highest level of support to lowest level of support, so you can see how the ideas ranked in the group as a whole. And again, only the task force members will get to vote. And again, that's not the end of the discussion. Okay. The homework document, I think, is in your packets right behind that, if you were able to find it. And it's short. It's the 47 ideas divided into the 6 categories that we talked about a minute ago that's on the ballot. And so if you think we got plenty on the table already and you're willing to leave it at that and hear what happens from the subcommittees, that is totally fine. But if there is something that you want to make sure really is on the table and you're not necessarily sure whether it will come forward, this homework is a chance for you to suggest what those missing ideas may be. It's also an important opportunity to review what I think the things are that we have heard at the meetings and make sure that they make sense to you. You would understand what that phrasing, the summary of the idea is, so that we can get your questions answered around those. So in category 1, you'll see there's 7 ideas we think have been talked about at the table. If there are additional ideas in that category that you think that we should be thinking about, whether it's a strategy or a tactic, the homework is an opportunity to sort of offer up those ideas. Similarly, category 2, we've got the most ideas. We got 24 different ideas around more services for people, or how to do services more effectively. If you take a look at that list and you think, oh, but this doesn't include X, just add that. This homework is just a chance to scribble that in there and send it back to me, and we'll make sure it gets on the table. Similarly, for the category about housing and shelter, improving public understanding, improving interagency coordination. And if you think an idea was brought to the table and we didn't get it on the list, we screwed up, this is also a chance, to put it in this homework so that we don't forget about it. Do folks understand where we're trying to go with this homework at least? Look at the ideas, make sure the words make sense to you. You would know whether from this description enough to say whether I think this is probably a good idea or I think this is not such a great idea, and add to the list if you think there are important things that are missing from this list. Go ahead and put it down here, and it'll end up on the ballot. It may or may not pass muster with your fellow task force members, but you will at least have the opportunity to get the idea on the table and have people consider it. So that's the drill. So it's a lot of data, it's a lot of issues, which is one of the reasons we're using this ballot approach, and we'll talk about that some more at the next time. And the staff are going to be scurrying around like mad creatures between now and then to do the evaluation on all 47 of these ideas, so pray for them. Between now and then, if there are questions or concerns, give me a shout or an email. You know how to find me, and I will try to respond to those as best I can. I will send this homework out to you all either tonight when I get home or first thing in the morning. And the deadline on it is next Thursday, close of business, and that's a hard deadline so that the staff have a prayer of actually responding to your new ideas. Okay? And again, so that's the drill. Thank you for listening. Thank you for, well, I apologize for, again, not being able to get to the other presentations, but we'll try to make sure that if you have, we can try to squeeze those in at the next meeting to some extent, and we'll also be hearing from the problem statement. We'll start moving towards a definition of the problem statement in a little more graphic way. Are there any other questions or anything before we let folks escape? Looks like it's actually 2 minutes before 6, so that's some kind of a miracle, but it's not the miracle I wanted that had the extra 30 minutes for the other presentations from the team. So again, I am sorry for that, but I think I really wanted to take advantage of having those folks here and letting you guys talk to them and hear from them. So thank you for that flexibility on your part. Okay then, thank you all. We are over the halfway point, yay, and we'll see you next time for meeting 6. Thanks very much.
Good comment about strategies and